get nobody pregnant.
Right.
You want to avoid an STD.
Right.
When I was growing up, HIV and AIDS was
huge.
very prevalent. And so it was really about avoiding consequences. And so really a part of the message, because it was so much just about avoiding certain consequences, really what people really just did was said, okay, let me take certain precautions to keep me from suffering said consequences. But really, one of the things I've learned, and as tough as this conversation is to have, one of the things I've come to believe is that every time God said don't, nothing that God tells us not to do is arbitrary. In other words, this standard on abstinence, it is not restrictive. Its intent is actually protective.
Life can be fast-paced, strenuous, and flat-out overwhelming. Life transitions and taboo topics can make it hard to catch your breath. Welcome to Breathe, a podcast that enables you to slow down, get your bearings, and engage in real conversations where no topic is off limits. Breathe is presented by Breath of Life, hosted by David Person and speaker-director Pastor Debleaire Snell.
Welcome to Breathe. I'm David Person,
Yes,
and
indeed.
it is good to be here with brothers.
We in the house. We in the house. We in the house.
Come on.
Yeah.
He didn't do it.
Oh,
though.
yeah. I fell off. My bad. Boom. There we go.
There it is.
David got it right this time.
Yeah, I remember.
Did he remember? You remember.
He's been practicing with us.
At home in the mirror. Get it right, David.
Come on. For those of you who listen to the podcast, we do a little fist bump thing. And you got to check out the video version of the podcast at some point. We'd love for you to do that.
Yeah, because we really enjoy ourselves.
We
You get
do.
to see us smiling and laughing. And how much smiling and laughing are we going to do today?
Well,
this month? Don't know.
Yeah. Well, we may do a lot of smiling.
We
might.
Depending. When I saw the topic for this month, I have to tell you, my first thought was, I went back to Salt and Pepper.
That's right. Yeah.
And their song, Let's Talk About Sex.
Let's talk about sex.
And so,
the month of April, we're talking about sex.
Salt and Pepper, shout out to you.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about sex.
It's springtime.
It's spring.
Birds and the bees, flowers in the trees.
Things are blooming, man. Yeah.
So,
it's in the air, man.
That's right.
In the air.
Right. That's what they used to say.
Attire is changing as the weather warms.
So true.
The whole shebang.
It's true.
Every man's challenge.
Every man's challenge.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk about sex this month, and we're going to start with the A word.
Ooh. Yeah.
Abstinence.
Abstinence. Yeah.
Abstinence.
Hey.
As a twice divorced single man.
Okay. Yeah.
The A word.
The A word.
That's a tough word.
It's a tough
baby.
word.
It's
It is.
a tough
That's
word.
a tough word.
Yeah. It's a tough word.
Yeah, it's a
and I'm
tough
going to tell you,
word.
God has been walking with me on this journey
Yeah.
for a number of years.
Yeah.
And I used to tell people, yeah, I'm just going to be transparent. I used to tell people, I hate abstinence.
You hate abstinence.
I hate it. I used to tell them I hated it.
Yeah.
I don't say that now.
Now.
But I used to say that. I used to say that.
Yeah.
And I meant it. I meant it.
We've come a ways.
Yeah.
Celibacy.
I mean, I think
Abstinence.
that's all the way real, though, David. I mean, I just think that anybody that's an adult, and again, of course, I'm married, but I remember my, in pastor years, I got married late. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
I was 26. A lot of my friends had been married for 3, 4, 5 years.
Okay.
And there were portions of that journey that I absolutely despised. And so I just think that,
And I think,
whether you're a really, really young person or whether you're a mature person, it is a tough stretch of life to navigate.
I think it's really good that we're starting right there. I think there's something to be said. We don't often hear the reality of it when the rubber meets the road. Like somebody may think to themselves who's watching, oh, these guys, they probably are just going to be like, you need to not do it. It's abstinence or nothing else.
Right.
So for us to start right there and say, man, it was a struggle, myself included. It was a struggle. It was a struggle from that perspective. I got married around the same age as you. So after college, and Yeah, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. Dating and being professional, it's a struggle. I know that I've got two kids now, and we're having some of those conversations. Not a conversation, but ongoing conversations, right? As it should be, around the whole topic of intimacy and the different flavors of intimacy, including sex, and when you're ready and when you're not, and what was my experience. I've been very transparent with my kids about the fact that I was not a virgin when I got married, and shared those pieces with them. I'm not hiding any of that stuff,
right.
And I want to let them know the pros and the cons of that thing as well, and some of the pieces that brings to the table. So I'm glad that we're starting right there on the conversation of abstinence. Whoever is out there, whoever is listening, we are not trying to simplify it. We're not trying to make it, some holy and spiritual ascent. It can be a struggle, and it has been a struggle for all of us sitting at the table right now.
Agreed. Yeah, in fact, I'm going to just say, again, we believe in transparency.
Absolutely.
Even after marriage, after divorces. I didn't practice abstinence. I'm not going to lie.
Okay.
Now, again, I'm not glorifying that.
Sure.
I'm just keeping it real.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Now, I will also say that I think, and there's a lot to my story that, there are people that know, and they know, and if they don't, they don't. But I will also say that I think God has walked with me on this journey.
Okay.
So even when I was not abstinent, I still think God was walking with me.
Okay.
But I think God does have a high ideal. And I think the ideal is that people should refrain from sex outside of marriage. That's the ideal. Now, we know that the biblical ideal around sex, when you start looking at biblical characters, has never been well, I won't say never, but in many cases, has not been lived up to.
No.
So it shouldn't be a shock to anybody that we in today's time would also have these
the same struggle,
right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Ecclesiastes says that there is nothing new under the sun. So whether you look at a young Samson or you look at some of Jacob's sons and how they moved, I just think it's just really clear that this part of the human experience is a difficult one to navigate. But I think that's why this conversation is critical.
Absolutely.
And why we really get into perhaps the why. Why God laid that particular, I don't want to say standard or maybe prohibition or restriction. Because I think that if we never really get into the why of it, because I think, let's be honest, I think most of us in a church context grew up and primarily the only instruction was don't.
That's all. Yes. That was the whole conversation. Right.
And to be honest with you, and I may be getting ahead of us in the dialogue, but I think that's problematic if there is no undergirding rationale or theology that guides that particular standard. And let me explain to you what I mean when I say that. It's funny because I remember even growing up, even some of the rationale, it was actually kind of surface. So it was just really about avoiding consequences that would disrupt your immediate life.
Agreed.
Meaning it was like you didn't want to get pregnant or you get nobody pregnant.
Right.
You wanted to avoid an STD.
Right.
When I was growing up, HIV and AIDS was very, very prevalent. And so it was really about avoiding consequences. And so really a part of the message, because it was so much just about avoiding certain consequences, really what people really just did was said, okay, let me take certain precautions to keep me from suffering said consequences. But really, one of the things I've learned, and as tough as this conversation is to have, one of the things I've come to believe is that every time God said don't, nothing that God tells us not to do is arbitrary. In other words, this standard on abstinence, it is not restrictive. Its intent is actually protective. So it's like this is like the crazy thing about it, right? So sexual desires, and I want to make sure we lay this out for the audience, because one of the things I think we sometimes do is we demonize sexual desires, that are built in
Yes.
by God.
Yes. Yep.
Like, I mean, these did not come from the devil. This is not a post-sin kind of result of Adam and Eve's choice.
Like, man.
Like, God built into us, man, an listen, it is an overwhelming desire.
Let me just testify.
Right? To experience sexual intimacy.
Yes, sir.
So that once a young person, an adult, reaches sexual maturity, it is almost an uncontrollable urge. And you've got to take some really major steps, you know what I'm saying, to kind of really be able to manage those things, those desires accurately. And so the reason I'm saying that is because I don't want somebody listening who is maybe unmarried or so on and so forth, who feels guilty for just having desires that are a part of the Creator's design for us. I mean, sex is His invention. Yeah. Like, I mean, He wants us, and it's funny because our good friend Myron Edmonds, he has this whole thing about how the devil wants us to have as much sex before we get married, and as little sex as possible after we get married. My God. And this is really a part of the challenge. We're going to talk about this in another episode. We got too many abstinent married couples. Ooh. Like that's actually a trauma. That's killing. Like the worst part is not that you have single people that are being sexually active. It's really that you have married couples that are practicing abstinence right now. That's actually a greater sin and atrocity. It is. And it's actually more destructive.
And we don't talk about
it, right?
Right.
But we will.
We will. Okay.
But see, this is why I think the point is. So this is the thing. So we said, all right, it's not restrictive, it's protective. And I want people to really digest this. And I think the grown people will really resonate this when I finally get to my point. And I may take the scenic route on this, so bear with me for a moment.
Yeah.
So anything that can bring you immense joy and pleasure and elation, the other side of that, when it's done incorrectly, the same level of joy and pleasure and elation it can bring. Yeah. When it's done improperly, it can bring an equal amount of pain. Destruction, hardship, and soul tyranny.
My gosh.
And so in the right context, man, God gave Adam and Eve something that, man, when practiced in the right context, I mean, it can bring a relief and an ecstasy and a joy and, man, a just a peak moment. Yeah. But when it's not managed correctly, it can bring a soul agony and an emotional pain that it is equally destructive. And that's why I want people to get it. So it's just kind of like you take one of these electrical outlets, right? Yeah. So it's designed for a plug, right? So you have small kids, they want to run around with knives and butter knives and forks and they want to stick anything into an outlet. Right. And I'm like, no. You can't just plug something into that. It's not designed for anything to be plugged into it. Why? Because an electrical cord is constructed in such a way where it's designed to handle that voltage.
Well
My
said.
gosh.
Well said.
And the reason that's critical is because in a marital context, like when sex happens, I mean, it is more than just a physical exchange. Yeah. There is just, man, an emotional bonding, tying. Yes. There's an emotional voltage that's there.
Ooh, voltage.
And see,
I like that.
The truth is that sometimes when you're unmarried, you're not really equipped to handle the voltage that behavior is going to, or that practice is going to bring. So it's not really, honestly, it's not about, man, an STD. It's not about a pregnancy. It's not, I mean, those are just other ancillary kind of fruit, you know what I'm saying, from kind of moving. It's funny, you have some married couples that when they get pregnant, they're just like, oh no. You know what I'm kind of saying. But I just think, the greater destruction is like the emotional voltage that is added to that relationship that it does not have the capacity to be able to handle. Yeah. And so, because one of the purposes of it, it's not just like, all right, just physical enjoyment. It is actually how a husband and wife are actually to maintain a oneness and a bond over the course of a lifetime. Right. So Gianna actually kind of has a thing where she talks about how she talks about how when you have a button that's loose, like when you stick the needle in and you sew it, you reinforce it. That process just kind of reinforces it. Yeah. It bonds it. It tightens it. Yeah. And almost kind of like that sexual act almost kind of reinforces. So when a husband and wife are kind of loose, like that bond kind of tightens it and reinforces it, so on and so forth. So this is kind of the problem and the danger. And I know I'm taking a little while.
No, but it's good.
But this is why I want, especially maybe younger people to understand it, or even just those who are dating, because the challenge is, like, what happens is, in some ways, emotionally, you can be creating a life bond with somebody that might not be there next week. And Dave, this is what I'm sure all of us have seen. Yeah. Like, you've seen people who are in maybe long-term, physical relationships or just emotional relationships that became physical. When those relationships end, those people grieve it. Almost, it's not quite the same thing, but it's almost like the agony of going through a divorce. Yeah. Like when you've kind of bonded with somebody in that way for 2, 3, 5 years. Yeah. And I just think that when people kind of connect that in that way, it's not like ripping off a Band-Aid. Like this idea of like, I'm just going to get over this relationship. No, like the length of time that it takes to clear emotionally, to spiritually reset, to just kind of remove that person out of your system so that you can even entertain someone new. It's one of the things that elongates that process is kind of the sexual bond that we form through intimacy. And so I think that's why God laid it out for us in that way, just because I think some of the pain and the agony and the stress that accompanies it, like, real talk, in some of our most anxious moments, so we talk about safe sex, there's really there's no such thing, right? But a lot of our most anxious moments, like, have come, or some of them have come, with just kind of waiting to see what some of the results of this practice will yield. Whether you're sitting there waiting to see if that strip is going to be blue or pink, or whether you're sitting in a clinic, waiting to find out the result of that lab test.
Or you get that call that says, I missed mine.
There you go. I'm late.
There you go.
Or even just like the relationship ends and now you're wondering how that person is moving with someone else. You know what I'm saying? Or now that even when you get married, you got all this baggage that creates comparison and insecurity and all the sort. So I just, as difficult as it is, I want to be clear, it is difficult. So when you say I hate it, I vibe with you. But I do think that when you kind of look at the long-term results, I think there are very few people that look back, even when they get married or get saved or walk with God, they look back on it and they say, all right, I think they're able to acknowledge, all right, this is how I did. I'm walking in God's grace, all right? I don't have to walk with shame. But I don't think most people, like, when they look back on their lives, like, you know what? That was worth it. Like, I don't think there's like celebration of man, you know what, man, I just, this is what I did. This is the best I managed it at that time. But I don't think most people really look back. You have some guys in locker room talk. They may kind of talk about certain moments or in a certain way. You know how guys can be from time to time. But when they kind of have those quiet moments, it's kind of like I probably would move a little bit differently if I knew then what I knew now, or if I understood what the results would be of that decision.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something real key that young people in particular, I think, need to hear over and over again, which is each intimate encounter you have becomes part of a collection that stays in your brain.
Your mind.
I know it's that way, especially as a guy.
As a male.
So I have clear memories, not of everyone, but of certain ones for sure. I remember the first women I was intimate with. You remember that.
There are certain things that never leave your mind.
That's right. And so then when you do decide to focus on one, hopefully for the rest of your life, those become competing images. So you're making love with your wife. But you've also got in your brain.
See,
women from your past.
You're telling the truth, Dave.
That's it.
You're telling the truth more than most of us want to hear, or more than most will admit or acknowledge. Because it's in your mind. It never goes away because we see, and you don't see with your eyes. You see with your mind. Your eyes are simply the vehicle through which your mind sees the world and records what's in the world.
That's right.
I think the other thing too is I totally resonate with both of you. One of the things that we've been chatting with our kids about is addiction. Now we've been talking about it from a number of different aspects. But you can't leave sex out.
Yeah.
And the truth is, you just don't know if you've got that bug.
That's right.
Until you try. And that's what we said with all the different types of things, cigarettes, drugs, whatever, alcohol. You just don't know. I mean, two people will grab the same drink. One person, it takes them down a different road. And the other person's like, I didn't really like how that tastes. And they just kind of move on. You just don't know if you have that bug until you try it. And so the best time to recognize that you probably are kind of addicted to sex is in marriage, not necessarily outside of marriage. And so you got a lot of different scenarios and to consider. And this is the reason why God has kind of laid it out the way that He is.
And if I could just add, just somebody who right now you're dating, right, and it's tough and it's challenging, but honestly, one of the things that actually compromises your ability to really get to know a person is when you just become so emotionally entangled through sexual intimacy. Now again, that is the natural kind of outgrowth of developing an emotional and physical attraction with somebody. You're going to want to mate with them. You're going to want to be as close as you possibly can, right? But one of the things is when you're in the information gathering phase, it actually clouds your judgment.
It sure does.
It harms your powers of observation. And it just kind of clutters things, in a way that kind of, one of the things that healthy singles need, you need a certain amount of emotional autonomy to be able to make thoughtful
decisions,
intelligent, long-term decisions. I tell young people all the time, I encourage them at summer camps, youth camps, I tell them to kind of take their hand and I tell them to put it right here on the tip of their nose and study it and examine it.
Right.
And then I tell them to put it about a foot away and look at it again. And I ask them, can you see it close when you're up close?
No.
Or when you're further away?
Mercy.
And of course, you can always see it a little bit better when it's a little further away.
Yeah.
And see, sometimes when we are so close in intimacy, it's hard to really see what's happening. It's hard to see what's obvious. So that sometimes there'll be people that aren't even in the relationship. They're seeing certain red flags or certain things from the beginning, like just by sitting down with y'all at dinner or watching how y'all move or watching how he or she talks to you. It's obvious. But sometimes, man, when you're just so emotionally entangled and tied up, sometimes red flags, they start to look orange or yellow or muted. You know what I'm saying? You start to overlook obvious defects because you're just so tied in. You're just... As the old folks say, your nose is open. You know what I'm saying? Like
that's what they used to say.
You just in it.
You just in there.
You're in certain things, and it's not really until sometimes when you make it a permanent relationship through marriage, and now you're saying, man, I got married and she changed or he changed. Nah, you were just so close to it that you couldn't really see certain things. So I think, I just think a healthy relationship practice is to kind of make sure you minimize, just if you're trying to see clear, you're trying to make a thoughtful, spiritual, intelligent decision, all I can say is that's not going to aid you in that process. It actually kind of hurts it a little bit.
One thing that occurs to me sitting here, and Kirk, you've made several references to talking to your children.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you talk to your children. I talked to my son. But my parents, and both of my parents are deceased, may they rest in peace, but my parents did not talk to me about sex.
Okay.
And I don't know if yours did, but I know many people in my age
I'll
group.
Say mine did.
Oh, really?
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I was blessed in that regard.
That's good.
I never had that conversation with my mom, but my dad. And it's funny because it was kind of we were kind of fairly new in the church, so on and so forth. But it was very clear. It was very frank. It was very direct. And honestly, it was probably, more instructive than some would do. It was just like, this is what you should do. However, if you do, these are some of the measures you need to take, so on and so forth as a young man. Because again, he just, he grew up with a different worldview on it.
Right.
And he was communicating what he knew and understood at that time what would be best for me.
Right.
With the assumption that as a young man, he's probably going to explore.
Do
So
this,
da,
do
da,
that.
da.
Yeah.
And this is what you need to do. And so, no, I was very fortunate that, we talked about it. Even sometimes when I didn't want to, he'd just be like, hey, how's it coming? You know what I'm saying? I was like, Dad, just, Dad.
Yeah.
But I thank God for it now. I really do.
No,
I really do.
that's not my experience, man.
Yeah.
And then I don't think my parents were very open about a lot of things,
But not sex.
Not sex.
Okay.
We just we didn't have an instructive diagram type discussion. We knew what it was, but we didn't really talk about it that much.
Yeah.
It just wasn't part of our rhythm.
Most people that I talk to in their for sure in their mid to upper 50s and older, parents didn't talk to them about sex.
Wow. That's the common.
And so we all I won't say all of us, but many of us then ended up stumbling into learning about it on a first-hand basis, and then trying to figure out how to manage it now that you're in it.
Or you're getting information from unreliable sources.
Very unreliable.
Your cousins, your
unreliable.
friends at school, and peers, and it's just, I ain't gonna lie, those are your mentors sexually.
I'll tell you a quick funny story.
Oh my word!
The day of my first wedding, I'm in the back of the church in my tuxedo, just kind of chilling out. My father comes to where I am, and he starts trying to talk to me about what needs to happen on my wedding night and how I need to manage it.
Right there,
right then. Wow!
In my mind, I listened respectfully, but in my mind, I was like, bro, that horse is so far down the road.
So he's probably saving it for that day.
I guess. I don't know, but I thought about it, and to me, it's a little humorous,
right?
But it's also a little sad, a little bit, in that the conversation needed to be had well before I was standing there on the cusp of this new phase of life, when I had already been well down that road. And I didn't say that to him. He didn't learn that probably until a few years before he died or something. That I actually was not this sexually naive person, that he may have thought that I was.
Right.
So, and I guess I'm bringing that up really not just to chuckle, but to ask a question, which is, do you think that the whole journey or the whole attempt to be abstinent for people who want to try to do that, and that's what we're advising, honestly, would be easier if people would have those conversations with parents, especially parents having them with young people, or even if you haven't been able to have that experience, maybe as a young adult, whether you've been successul with it or not, if you had someone that you could talk to, that you could trust.
Yeah. Well, see, I want to I totally agree so the answer to your question is, I think it would. Absolutely, unequivocally. I wanted to interject there. You talked about whether you're a young adult that has been successful or not. I do want to make that other thing clear. Whether you have been unsuccessful in the past, you can start again today.
Right.
So that's the grace of God. God says you can start again today. You can start again today. So just because you have been unsuccessful doesn't mean, well, the cat's out of the bag now, so I might as well just go ahead and live however I want to live. Yeah. If you want to choose to walk the road of abstinence today, God will empower that. Now, to your question, I do believe that the reason for, and this is the work of Satan, He makes these conversations so rare. He makes the conversation taboo, to be quite honest. That he keeps it in the realm of you. We had an episode of Point of View where the Nixons were on with you and Sister Snell, and they talked about she being a teacher sharing with her classroom some things about sex, and they were looking at her like, that's not something spiritual. Like the whole concept of sex is unspiritual. And I said to myself, that's terrible. But this is the environment we create when we don't touch it. Because where are they having those conversations? Okay, as a parent, maybe you have that conversation at home. I thank God for youth leadership at our church with Pastor Kim and Pastor Mark, who are constantly reinforcing the conversations that we're having at home. Beautiful. We didn't have that growing up, but I do believe it takes the village. The abstinence journey can be done, but I do think it cannot be done in silence and isolation. It's not brute force. It's gonna take a hand-holding approach.
I think one of the things, especially maybe on the male side too, I think a lot of young men, their early pursuit of sex is not even just, all right, a response to personal desire.
Right.
A lot of it is, it's socialization.
There it is.
Like, this is your path to manhood. It is like a pelt on the wall.
Got you.
And honestly,
that's my story, y'all.
Having a
real talk,
a man say to you, this is not what makes you a man.
Right.
Like, that changes the game. Now, there's going to come a time where you enter into sexual maturity and like, okay, like this is just tough. Just in a vacuum.
Period. Yeah.
But like sometimes when you're in that 12, 13, 14, 15, like the desire is there, but it's not like overwhelming yet. But a part of that pursuit is, man, just a seeking acceptance, to be able to come back to the guys with a boast. You know what I'm saying? To be able to come back and say, this is what I did. I'm in now. Yeah. And honestly, just being able to have a man say to you, this is not what makes you a man, or to even help you understand the value of a woman, or even just like, a lot of men, just even with the idea, that you can have casual sex, right? Like, and again, it can go both ways. So one of the things about sex is that it's going to always mean more to one
than it is to
the other. Like, that's why just the whole idea of casual, like somebody's going to get clingy, needy.
Feelings. Yes.
It's going to shift, and somebody's going to be wanting more from it, and that's why, like, and then that whole thing is going to dissolve into something that's going to be kind of bitter and toxic, in some way, shape, or form. But a big part of that is just even understanding, like, okay, in some ways, when you engage with that woman, this is how, in some ways, it's going to change the way she feels about you.
Wow.
And you're thinking, all right, we're both adults, and we just both deciding to have a good time. No, it's that may be what you're thinking.
You're bonding.
But you're bonding. And in some ways, she's going to bond a little bit differently than you. Yeah. Because even by nature, men can have a physical encounter without an emotional attachment. It's by true. And large, a woman is not going to have a physical encounter unless there is an emotional attachment. That's not across the board 100%. But by and large, they generally tend to operate a little bit. There's usually a little bit more emotion tied to it.
We tend to detach easier.
Right?
Though I think we do what we don't realize. If you don't mind my interjection,
sure. No,
Pastor. I think that there is emotional residue that remains.
Yep.
Like I said earlier.
Yeah.
I remember clearly.
Yeah.
The first women
residue.
I was intimate with, I remember
Sure.
clearly. And we still have a special bond to this day.
Yeah.
Even though we're not, we're not involved with each other. Other marriages have taken place.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, may not have seen them for years. But when we connect, there's something special about that connection.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 10%. Yeah. And so I'm just saying, I just think that even, so to your point, I just think if young men are especially, because girls are kind of cautioned, depending on the culture, to kind of abstain. Guys are kind of taught to go and hunt, you know what I'm saying, and bring back a trophy.
Right.
I just think that if we even are able to socialize young men differently. It'll have a different conversation. Just even when just something as simple as learning how to see a young woman as a person.
Yes.
And not just parts.
Not parts, right.
That changes the game radically in terms of how you engage.
Yeah. But so, I wanted to interject there as well. I totally agree. I do think, however, that we are seeing some shifting in some of these, what we have heretofore accepted as roles for male and female, because these women are hunting now.
Different.
These women are hunting,
and
it's a whole different world out there. Talking to some of my younger cousins, and they're like, man, they're chasing us down. So and yes, I don't know what it looks like from a female perspective. That's not my story, but I'm just saying I know for my younger male cousins, the women are definitely doing a lot of the hunting. So
a lot more.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I heard that quite a bit.
It has shifted there. But from the perspective of I just believe that having the open conversations, being real with yourself and those you're in conversation with about the feelings that you have and the urges that God has placed within you. And then also just recognizing, like, society from biblical days till now has changed. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying people were married a lot earlier.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And so when that biological thing kicks in, for us in this particular, flavor of the Earth's history, generally marriage is still another 10, 15 years out.
Yeah.
Sometimes longer.
Sometimes longer. And so that abstinence piece,
and that is where, to a certain extent, because I think this is where I think we take our cues from the world.
Right.
Not like it's inherently evil, but I just think that, maybe previous generations understood something. It seems kind of strange for like 16, 17-year-olds to get married.
Yeah.
But I think they understood once you're entering into an age of sexual, you're reaching your sexual prime or peak.
Right.
You need to at least be perhaps thinking along those lines. I do think that by and large, and I'm not saying I want kids to get married, they're 18 or 19, so on and so forth. But I do think that, like, culturally, we don't even start talking to our kids about marriage until they're engaged.
Yeah.
Like, I think these are conversations that just need to happen earlier. I do think that we should still espouse marriage as a part of God's ideal, as opposed to, all right, you live with a partner here for 2 or 3 years, or just even the idea of get all your fun out of your system when you get married. I just think these are errant approaches that kind of mess us up a little bit. But I do think that it would probably be healthier, well, even for young people to consider or begin praying about that maybe a little earlier, because you can still go to school after you're married. You can still pursue a PhD after you're married if you're dedicated and intentional. Because a lot of young people, they do that while they're living with a partner or cohabitating with a partner. So you can do it, so, but there's, for whatever reason, we've kind of created this barrier that says, okay, no, you can't get married until you reach a certain place. But you're at a place in your life where you're 27, 30, 35, and you're peaking. And it's a season where you should be mating with somebody that you're in a covenantal relationship with. So it's just maybe a different way of thinking about things. And I would just say to somebody who maybe you're older, you're just living life maybe, and you're listening to it. Because again, the goal is not to guilt. It's not to condemn, but to just kind of help you realize, like, okay, the reason God laid this out, it is not just like this arbitrary restriction. It is a wholeness practice.
Right.
It is recognizing that, okay, I can cross that and there'll be some immediate benefits. But there's going to be some, I love the term you use, there's some residue that comes along with it. And in an episode of Hey, Pastor Snell, I state that sometimes the sexual consequence lasts way longer than the pleasure. And so you just want to keep that as a part of your configuration. But I just think there are some that maybe maybe that's not a part of your thinking, but maybe you need to be at least praying for, a spouse, thinking marriage, and just kind of looking to kind of, do relationships a little bit differently. Because I just think that there's a price tag that's attached to just kind of the casual encounters that we don't always see.
So we're almost out of time. Real quickly, let's give some practical advice to people who want to try to be abstinent, to be celibate until they marry, if they decide to marry. What do you in addition to praying? What do you suggest?
So honestly, I think, I do think it's harder in this culture. And I'm going to say this, David. I don't really think the steps I'm going to say, they're not practical. Like, it's just got to be what you have to do if this is something you're aspiring to do. And so, I think I'm not sure if it's Proverbs 6 or 7. He asked the question, can someone take fire into their bosom and not be burned? And essentially kind of what he's saying is that, okay, and Ecclesiastes 1, let me say it, the Bible is so good. It says the eye is not satisfied with seeing.
It is not.
And the ear is not satisfied with
not.
hearing. Like, no, because like what your eye is going to do is it awakens desire. I mean, so I would just say that at the end of the day, if you're an unmarried person, really, or a married person that's trying to kind of keep your thoughts and affections in covenant, you just got to really guard the amount of sexual content you are consuming. Like, there is no way around it. I'll be honest with you. I'm on social media, but I come on to make a post, and then I'm kind of off. Because the truth is, like, there's just
inordinate.
Right, there's just a lot that's out there. Yeah, on Instagram.
Man,
and it's just kind of like, in order for me to kind of stay focused, I can't move like that. You know what I'm saying? And so, and that's why I say it's not really practical. Like, I hop on to kind of tell you what's happening at the prayer meeting at church this week. Wish some happy birthdays, but I can't hang out in that space. That's just a decision I have made to do that.
Yeah.
I just think that, at the end of the day, you got to guard your portals, the amount of content, because at the end of the day, you're human. Like, let's just be honest with you. It doesn't matter how much you pray, it doesn't matter how spiritual you are. If that's kind of what you're saturating your mind with that, those desires are just going to fan into a place where you gotta act on them. And so I just think that, number one, you just got to guard your portals. I think you got to avoid idle time. I just think the more time you have where you just are not doing anything, I just think desires peak in that kind of space. But I think the other thing is too, if you're in a relationship, I think you have to be partnered with somebody that's trying to move in the same direction. I think it's hard if you're trying not, but the person's like, that's not my value. That's not my conviction. I think you're going to always have a little bit of conflict there. And so these are not practical things. It's just kind of where we are with our human nature. And again, these are not evil desires, but they just have to be like electricity. It's a lot of power, but you got to keep it in the conduit, or else it can have destructive effects. So I think prayer, the word, but practically, I think at the end of the day, you just got to manage the amount of content you're exposed to.
I'll just add there. You gave a lot of food for thought. I was watching a episode of a podcast, and the lady on there was trying to help people to overcome their what I now recognize to be an addiction to sugar and salt. And she was like, well, if you're addicted, then there is no gradual weed out.
That's true.
You have to go through a period of cold turkey, and then you test and see. So I think I'm just kind of agreeing with what you said. I think every prescription is going to be based on the person. So you've got to know you. Can you go over to the house and hang out and leave and not do anything?
Right.
You've just got to know you. I think there's got to be a healthy conversation with you to say, I'm just not that strong. I need to avoid that scenario. And so I see some of the things you shared is practical. It's across the board. Maybe not practical, but it's across the board. These are things that every one of us can do. But I think when you're really wanting to get to the specifics of what would work for me, to be abstinent, there's going to have to be an honest conversation about you and some of your things that you naturally lean towards, some of the things that you spend time doing. Last thing I'll also share is, are you working in purpose? I think this is a major. So you talked about it. You kind of touched on it by saying avoid idleness. But this is the other side of it. People who are working they're on purpose, in purpose. Yeah, it's still there, but it's a lot less because their energy, their time, their mental capacity, everything is focused on, man, this is what God has placed within my hands. And I'm single right now, and I have a lot more latitude, right? So I'm just pushing in that particular area and towards that goal. So are you working in purpose? Do you know what God has called you to do? Those are some things I would add in there.
Can I add something too, David? And this is where I think we have to just kind of be reflective and not just this is where you have to lead your feelings and not be led by them. And not just be creatures of moment. So when God had the children of Israel eat the Passover lamb before they left Egypt, there was a very strange instruction he gave them. He told them to eat it with bitter herbs. And there was a powerful symbolism when he told them to eat it with bitter herbs, because one of the things, whenever they were celebrating, remember that eat those bitter herbs, it was to remind them of the bitter experiences that they had in Egypt, which was the catalyst for them praying for God to deliver us. So every time they were supposed to eat those bitter herbs to remind them, so when they were tempted to want to go back, these bitter herbs said, "No, remember, it's better over here. These bitter herbs remind us how hard it was, so on and so forth." And I do think that there has to be, as we're contemplating and weighing those decisions, I think there are some of us that are still dealing with the outworkings of certain sexual decisions.
Totally agree.
But sometimes you can kind of forget it in the heat of the moment and realize, okay, man, how bitter was it?
Yeah.
Man, when I had to end a relationship with somebody I had gotten that invested with. How bitter was it? You know what I'm saying? Last time I found myself in a clinic trying to wait for the result. How bitter was it the last time? So on and so forth. So I just think that, again, if you're trying to walk not just in holiness, wholeness. You got to kind of don't walk in amnesia. Just because there is opportunity presenting itself. There's a bitterness on the other side of certain decisions, and at some point you just got to kind of say, man, I'm tired of having to start over. I'm tired of having to reset. I'm tired of having to deal with this kind of pain. For somebody I'm not even married to, so on and so forth. And so I just think that has to be a part of that, your calculus, so to speak.
As we wrap up, I'm going to add one other thing to the wisdom that has been shared today. Out of my personal experience.
And your wisdom may matter the most because you're on the
journey. You cannot engage in this journey in secret.
That's good.
Keeping secrets is part of what enables the behaviors that we shouldn't be engaging in. So
accountability.
Have somebody that you're accountable to. That's the key word. Accountability.
That's it.
Doesn't have to be the whole. I'm not saying put up billboards all over the town.
No.
But
somebody.
Whether it's your pastor, your close friend, a therapist. Come
on, talk about it.
I think therapy is important too. You used the word addiction earlier.
That's right.
Therapy is extremely important. If you're dealing with that. But you also may be dealing with brokenness, even if you're not addicted. Brokenness that is instigating
this activity.
Right. So
there's an emptiness that you're trying to fill with that activity.
Right. So sometimes getting that wholeness is actually what helps you manage that and walk in holiness.
That's
so sometimes it's outside in, sometimes it's inside out.
That's right.
I love that.
It's a very, 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 very valid point there, man. Accountability is going to be huge.
It's going to be huge. You got to have somebody that even if you're both struggling together, but you can be honest with each other and real. That's very important.
That's very important.
All right.
This was good.
There was a lot to digest today, and this was a longer segment than I think we had planned. But I think even that was in purpose.
I think so.
So, before you panic,
about
every how am I going to manage all of this that they talk about today? Just remember to stop.
Stop.
Pray and breathe.
Breathe is produced by David Person for Breath of Life. Executive producer is Debleaire Snell, and sound engineer is Kirk Nugent. Audio episodes of Breathe can be found on Apple, Spotify, or Google podcast platforms. For video episodes and extra content, check out the Breath of Life YouTube channel. Breath of Life is faith-based content, resources, and programs from a contemporary urban perspective for those looking for hope and guidance. We believe that every breath we take is a testimony that God is consistent, that He loves us, and has a plan for our lives.